Welcome back to Wall of Power TV. I'm your host, Paul Metsa. We continue our conversation with Mr. Louis Kemp, childhood buddies of a guy named Bobby Zimmerman, who became Bob Dylan. Louis wrote a great book recently released called Dylan and Me. You're going to dig it. Now, the end of, in your book, you start to talk about, I don't know if it was the end of the tour with Bob Dylan and the band, but you're starting to run into people like Jack Nicholson and Marlon Brando and Cher, and you name it. It must have been exciting for you, being a man who's been in the fish business for years, to hook up back with your buddy Bob Dylan, who's now climbing the ladders of fame, and to be hanging out with these famous people.
You know, it was interesting and fun. Another blessing I received from God was none of that stuff, got to me. It didn't, I was just as impressed with the guy that worked on the slime line in my fish company in Alaska, who did a good job, as anybody who was famous,
That's probably why Bob felt so comfortable with you.
I think so. He saw that none of that meant anything to me.
There must have been nights, though, when you were in your rocking chair behind Levon Helm, that still knocks me out, man, and you're seeing 20,000 people completely in tune to what Bob is singing about and what the band is playing. You must have had that old nostalgic film reel in your mind going, oh my God, we talked about it, he talked about it when we were 8 and 9 years old, and here it is.
11 and 12.
11 and 12, and
Yeah.
here's the dream come true.
Yes. No, that I flashed on that, on that personal level, of our experience going back then and where he was now, and that and there I was in the rocking chair with him,
You have a great part in your book, Dylan and Me, where everybody, I think it might have started on that tour, everybody's lighting their lighters.
Yes.
So it looks like 20,000 candles.
Yes.
In the darkness.
But that was on tour 74.
The other thing I loved about your book, and I suggest everybody get a copy. We're going to tell you at the end of the show where to get it. I bet you could Google Bob Dylan and Me right now by Louis Kemp and find it. But if you listen to Dylan's songs and lyrics over the years, he's got a lot of references to Mexico. Something is Burning, Romance in Durango, Going to Acapulco, Senor, one of my all-time favorite tunes. And of course, then the tune he wrote with the great Sam Shepard, Brownsville Girl. But there was two different times you mentioned in your book that you spent in Mexico. One with Larry Keegan, yourself and Bob. Tell us about that first, and then we'll jump a little forward ahead about Kinky Friedman and Harry Dean Stanton and you.
Well,
Rousers down there.
Okay, so the first occasion that I went to Mexico was in February of 1973 when Bobby was shooting the movie Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, a Sam Peckinpah movie that had Chris Christopherson playing Billy the Kid.
And Bob was Alias.
Yes, he played a kind of a shadowy character called Alias. But Bobby was writing the music for that movie. So when I was in New York with him in the fall of '72, and we got back together and we were hanging out in New York, and we had a great time together, probably 10 days. As I was leaving to go back to Minnesota, he said to me, I'm going to be shooting this movie in Durango. If you like, come and hang out with me. And I said, okay, is it all right if I invite Larry to come too? He said, sure.
The great Larry Keegan.
Yeah, the late, great Larry Keegan. And he said, sure. So when I got back to Minnesota, I called Larry and told him, we're going to Durango.
and by now, Larry was a quadriplegic.
Yes.
He had lost the use of his legs in a diving accident as a teenager, and about 10 years or so later, got in a car accident and became a quadriplegic.
Yes.
No movement from the neck down.
That's correct. And he had a full-time, he spent a lot of time living in Mexico, in Guadalajara, running a place for disabled people down there. mostly Americans who came down there because it was cheaper and the weather was good, and they got whatever help they needed. So I flew in to Mexico. I can't remember. He told me what town to fly into because he was in Guadalajara, and he picked me up, and we drove up to Durango, and we hung out with Bobby on the set. Bobby timed it so most of the movie would have already been shot, so he had more time, to spend hanging out. And that's where we met Harry Dean Stanton. Harry was in that movie. Great character actor.
Great character.
Big character. Big
Yeah,
character on his own. Yeah. And so we hung out with him. Actually, one night when Bobby and I were alone, and he was sitting on a stump playing his acoustic guitar while he was in the process of writing this music for the movie. And I'm sitting in the director's chair. Everybody was gone. I'm sitting in Sam Peckinpah's director's chair. And Bobby said, "You want to hear one of the songs I wrote for this movie?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So he played it for me, and it turned out to be Knocking on Heaven's Door.
Wow.
Yeah. So after the movie was over, after he had done all his work on the movie, we decided we're going to take a little trip through Mexico rather than go back home right away. And we all piled into Larry's van. Bob, Larry, and I, Larry's helper, Alfonso.
I knew Alfonso, great guy.
We nicknamed him the Holy Fonz. That was the nickname we had.
I never heard that.
Yeah, the Holy Fonz. And Harry Dean. And we drove down to Mazatlan.
Okay.
And we hung out there at a hotel right on the beach. And Larry, Harry, and Bob would be drinking tequilas and jamming all the time. and I'd be drinking my orange juice, trying to keep taking care of them to make sure they didn't get too rowdy. And it was a great trip.
I remember when I saw Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid at the Mako Theater in Virginia. I don't know if you ever got to know the Deutsches, but they ran both the Granada and the Mako in Virginia. And I remember the death scene with Slim Pickens. And when that song came on, it was so incredibly moving. And I don't know when's the last time Dylan was really on my radar, but nothing really came out in that 71 through 73 period. But that's one of the greatest moments, I think, where music meets cinema. And really became magical.
No, he wrote that whole score, and that song, of course, became a big hit.
Now, it must have been interesting for you, Louis Kemp, to be sitting there. You were one of the first guys to have not only to hear these new Bob Dylan tunes that ended up on Blood on the Tracks, but Knocking on Heaven's Door. What did you feel like? I mean, I know he was your buddy and you're just hanging out, but there must have been something in the back of your head that saying, this is damn special.
He invited me to come to the studio in Santa Monica when he was recording Planet Waves.
Wow.
Yeah.
With the band.
Yes. And so I went there. It was either the first or second day that they were recording. And I walked in with a girl that I had been dating, Stephanie. I talk about in the book. Like there's a picture of her and I in the book. And I just said to her, "I'm going to see a friend of mine who's in the studio." I didn't even tell her who it was.
Right.
And she said, "Okay." So she came with me. We walk in. He had just finished cutting Forever Young. Both versions. He had a slow version and a fast version. And he was pondering which version to put on the record. So I walk in and he says, "Louis, sit down. I want you to hear these two versions of a song I just cut. Tell me which one you like better." And so he has the engineer play the two versions. And Stephanie, she wasn't fazed by any of this. As soon as he finished playing the second version, Bob said, "Well, what do you think?" And before I could say anything, Stephanie says, "Bob, you're getting mushy in your old age. You look, and here's this young, cute girl, always, speaking up like that. And he looked at her, and then he smiled, and he said, well, what do you think, Louis? And I told him, I like them both. And he ended up putting both on the record.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Wall of Power TV. I'm your host, Paul Metsa. My guest that I'm so delighted and honored to have is Louis Kemp, who wrote a great book that just came out. It's called Dylan and Me. It has a lot of stories about them growing up together, meeting at Camp Herzl in Webster, Wisconsin. And the gist of the book that we're going to be talking about now is when Bob asked Mr. Louis Kemp, who has never managed a rock and roll show in his life, to produce the Rolling Thunder Revue. First of all, tell us a little bit about this bookmark that's in this great book.
Okay, so what I did is I took, for my private collection, a ticket from the opening nights in Plymouth, Mass. We opened it at the Plymouth Memorial Auditorium in Plymouth, Mass, 1,600-seater, okay? No major act has ever played Plymouth, I guarantee
Since
you.
the Pilgrims.
Yeah, that was it. They were the last major, headliners that came to Plymouth. But we wanted to go to all the way places, and we chose Plymouth, and we chose Thanksgiving so we could combine the Pilgrims and the Goblins together for that opening night. And so I took the ticket from that night, original ticket, a picture of it, with the buttons. We had different color Rolling Thunder buttons that we gave out to guests, and if they got a button for one night, that color was only good to go backstage for that night. If they tried to use it another night, it wouldn't work because we rotated it.
Right.
Right. Okay. And then on the other side is the ticket for the night of the Hurricane concert at Madison Square Garden, the last concert of the first segment of Rolling Thunder.
Great deal at twice the price. So, Louis Kemp, Bob comes up to you one day and said, I'm thinking about this crazy tour called the Rolling Thunder Revue. I need somebody to help produce it. What did you say?
Yeah, so here's how it went down. I had just come back from Alaska in July '75. I drove down to the farm. We hung out for 5-6 days. We played basketball. We went for a ride on the Crow River on a little rowboat he had there.
Is Bob a good basketball player?
Yes. We played 1-on-1 every day.
Good jump shot?
Well, he's got a good hook shot.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's got some good moves where he fake one way and go the other way.
I like that.
Yeah, he's good. And we had fun, and it was hot and sweaty, but we did it. We enjoyed it. Then he said to me, I got this tour in mind that I want to do, and I mentioned it to a few promoter types in New York, and I mentioned it to my guy at Columbia, which was Don DeVito. He's the only guy Bob would talk to at Columbia. He wouldn't talk to any of the suits. Don was like his type of guy. That's who he coordinated everything with at Columbia. And he said, but everybody said to me, you're too big for that.
Right.
He told me I want to do like a mystery musical tour, small venues, all the way places, like a carnival style.
Right.
And they said, no, you're Bob Dylan, you can't do that.
Right. Welcome back to Wall of Power TV. I've been having a most enjoyable conversation with my new friend, Louis Kemp, who wrote a great book called Dylan and Me. We were just talking about Bob's idea for the Rolling Thunder Revue. They had about 3.5 months to put it together. How did you decide which musicians you wanted to invite first?
Okay, so the way it went down, when Bobby and I, when he invited me to produce it, he said to me, I'll put the show together, and I'll be responsible for that, and you're responsible for everything else. And I naively said, okay,
Sure.
Not knowing what everything else was, but okay. And so he put the show together. He contacted Joan Baez, Roger McGuinn, and he had, at that time, he had just Cut Desire. He had Rob Stoner there, Scarlett Rivera.
Right.
Yeah. So he went back to those people as at the core of his band, and had Joan Baez come on as a as a solo entertainer, and she sang with him on a few numbers, and Roger did his own parts as well, and then other people would come to the shows, and he would invite them to perform. A lot of people, and Joni Mitchell heard about it, and she flew out, and Bob put her on stage, and people loved her, and she stayed for a couple concerts, and after a couple concerts, her manager Elliot Roberts, who just recently passed away, who was also Neil Young's manager, took me aside and said, "Louis, Joni's really having a good time. She'd like to stay for the rest of the tour." I said, "No problem. We'd love to have her, consider it done,
Right.
she'll be on the tour." And he said, "There's only one problem. I usually go out with Joni when she's out on the road, but Neil's going out in a few days and I have to leave."
Right.
He said, "Will you take care of her?" I said, "No problem. I'll personally, look after her on your behalf." And that's what happened. And Joni stayed for the whole tour.
What about Allen Ginsberg? Because he played a big part in the first part of it. Tell us his involvement. And I met Allen once, actually, after a Bob Dylan show at the Roseland Ballroom. Of course, been a big fan of his forever. But was it Bob's idea to have, was Allen opening the show?
So Alan, Bob was a fan of Alan's.
Yeah.
Yeah. And an influence in the early days. He read his work and was influenced by it, as well as Kerouac's. And so he invited Alan to come on the tour, kind of, without a given role, but just, he turned out to be, like, in my opinion, in my words, Alan was the moral compass of the tour. Alan was, a very special guy and had a very high moral compass, so to speak. And personally, if I got too excited or too heavy, he would, come and tap me on the shoulder, say, lighten up, lighten up. One time he actually kicked me in the ass to get my attention when I was dealing with a reporter, and so it was good to have Alan on the tour.
There's so many great scenes in the Martin Scorsese Rolling Thunder Revue movie that's on Netflix now. One of the great ones is when you and Bob show up in Walter Yetnikov's office,
Yes.
the head of CBS Records. Tell us about that.
All right, so that was a real interesting story. 2 days before I had gone up to Walter's office, I had mentioned to Bob, I said, "Bob, do you think Columbia would, we're playing all these small halls, and all of a sudden, we got a lot more people than we anticipated." And he had, a few weeks before, sprung on me that he wanted to shoot a movie during the tour. That was not part of our original conversation.
Ronaldo and Clara.
Yeah, that was not part of our original itinerary or part of the tour. And so I could see the budget, climbing,
Right.
and I was responsible for making it balance. So I said to Bob, we're incurring a lot more expenses than we originally anticipated. I'd like to go up to Columbia and see if I can get them to, give some promotional support, because they're going to benefit from this tour.
Sure.
Yeah. And, you just you got Blood and Tracks out, which is doing great. Desire is about to come out. Your catalog, they have it all. They should give us some promotional
kick
money.
in a little
Yeah,
bit.
they should help. And so Bob said, "Well, I don't know if they do that, but it'd be nice if you could get them to help out." So I called his gal who ran his office in New York, who dealt with Columbia, and I told her, and she said, "No, they're not going to give you a cent." She said, "I've
Right.
tried for years to get Columbia to give promotional money for Bob's stuff, and they always turn me down." I said, "Well, there's no harm in trying."
Right. Nothing ventured,
Yeah,
nothing gained.
yeah. And she laughed at me. She didn't laugh with me. She laughed at me. She said, "Oh, you're wasting your time." And she laughed. I said, "You know what? Who's the president of Columbia?" I had no idea.
Right.
I didn't know any of those people. I said, "Who's the president of Columbia Records?" And she kind of said, "Well, that's Walter Yetnikov.
Right.
He was a big deal.
Yeah.
Like everybody's supposed to know who he is." And I said, well, please give me his phone number. I'm going to call him up. She just shook her head, but she got me the number. I called that number, and his assistant answered, and I said, I'm Louis Kemp, and I'm producing a tour for Bob Dylan that's going to start here in at the end of October, and I'd like to come up and see Walter to coordinate between us and Columbia so that Columbia can make the most of marketing his catalog and his records. She said, well, let me talk to Mr. Yetnikoff, and I'll get back to you. She called back a half hour later and said, Mr. Yetnikoff would be very pleased to see you. I said, good. She said, when do you want to come? I said, I'll come tomorrow. So she gave me the address. I went over to the CBS building. It's dubbed the Black Rock because it's all black granite clad. Yeah. And I went and I saw him, and he was very friendly. And he said, I'm so excited that Bob's going on a tour again. And our Don DeVito told me that he just cut a new record, and it's fabulous. And we want to coordinate with you guys very closely so we can give out tickets to all the DJs and stock the record stores in the cities that you're going to be traveling. And, he was just pumped up, And I listened, I let him talk, and then he got done. And see, back in those days, the DJs were very important.
Yeah.
There was no internet, and they used to give tickets to the DJs to get them to talk about the tours and the records and everything. So, especially for a big name act, those tickets were hard to get. So, it gave them juice,
Right.
So, so he went through that whole rap. And I said, well, Walter, this tour is a little bit different. I've been explaining it to you. So I explained to him what we were doing, small cities, handbills, a couple of days ahead of time. Even the entertainers didn't know where we were going. We're not telling nobody nothing.
Yeah, mahjong parlors, gymnasiums.
Yeah, we're not telling nobody nothing. We're going to all the way places. We're playing small halls. We're going to only break the shows a couple of days ahead of time.
Right.
It's going to become a mystery thing. And he said, oh. And he said, that's amazing. It was like, he was, like this. And I said, and by the way, Walter, we need Columbia to add some support, some promotional support because, we're taking this type of a tour. And we need $100,000 from Columbia to help.
It's a lot of money these days.
Well, that would be at least $500,000.
That's what I was going to guess.
Yeah. So it was big bucks back then, and $500,000 is big bucks now. And he snapped at me right away. He said, oh, we don't do that.
Right.
We don't do that. He said, if we did that for Bob, we'd have to do that for everybody.
Right.
So I kind of shook my head, and I said, that's too bad, Walter, because if you're not willing to put, some of Columbia's money in the pot to show your good faith,
Right.
we can't help you. He said, what do you mean you can't help me? I said, you're not going to get any tickets, and you're not going to get any knowledge of our itinerary. Maybe you can score a few tickets on the street.
Right.
And then I turned, and I started walking towards the door.
Right.
Okay, hoping he'd stop me.
Right.
And when I got close to the door, he yelled, come back, come back.
Right.
He said, we'll give you the $100,000.
Right.
But we need access. I said, okay, Walter, you'll have access. Please have the check at Bob's office tomorrow. And it was there. It was there. And so when I went back and told Bob, obviously he was pleased, and he said, good job, Louis. And then 2 days later, he was brainstorming with the film crew. They were going to go out around the town, New York, and get some street footage, to supplement the movie that they were shooting. And I was there in the session, and I said, Bob, why don't we go back to Columbia, to the CBS building, and let's crash Walter Yetnikoff. Right. Let's go unannounced, no appointment.
Maybe we could get another $100,000. Who knows?
Well, actually, we had something we wanted to do. We wanted to get. He had cut the Hurricane song, but the album wasn't going to come out till January. But Bob wanted the Hurricane song out right away because he wanted to feature that during the tour.
Right.
And apparently DeVito had said, well, I don't know if we can get it out before that. They don't usually do that. It's a short schedule, blah, blah, blah. So I said, let's go to Yetnikoff and I'll talk to him about that, you know. But let's do it unannounced.
Right.
So Bob and I went to Columbia. We went in the lobby with the film crew following us, you know, and they freaked out right away, you know, film crew and, you know, I mean, they're big security there, all these security guys, and they came running over and said, "What are you doing here? You can't film here. Turn that off. Turn that off." I told the guys, "Just keep shooting," you know. And the guy said, "Who are you here to see? What do you want?" I said, "We're here to see Walter Yetnikoff."
Right.
They said, "Do you have an appointment?" I said, "No, we don't." "You got to get out of here."
Right.
You know, they figured
Right.
it was some crazy show. I said, "Buddy, I don't think you better throw us out, because I think Walter will be very upset if you throw Bob Dylan out." And the guy went like this, you know, and he looked over at Bob.
Even
you
the
know.
security guy knew who Bob Dylan
Oh yeah,
was.
well, of course.
Of course.
And he looked over at Bob, you know, and you know Bob was just stoic, you know, no smile, no nothing. And the guy said, "Okay, stay here, but stop filming. I'll call upstairs." Comes back and says, with a different attitude, "Please follow me." You know, and he took us up the elevator, and then that scene that you see in the movie, that clip, is from that time when we crashed Walter.
Louis Kemp, I know you have appointments after this. You've had a busy several days in Minneapolis. I want to really tell everybody out there in the Wall of Power TV audience, get this book, especially if you love Bob Dylan. If you have a good friend and you've had a lifelong journey with them, you're going to enjoy this book just from that level alone. We could talk to Louis all afternoon. You got to read about Marlon Brando. You got to read about Patti Smith. You got to read about hanging out at the concerts, around the concerts, before the concerts, after the concerts. It's wonderfully well written. If you're from northern Minnesota, you're going to enjoy a lot of the people and places as well.
And also you'll read about the food fight I had at the Chinese Lantern with Joan Baez in Duluth.
I've had dinner at the Chinese
Yes.
Lantern with my folks.
Yes.
Yeah, Louis, this has been so incredible. So tell the people now, they can get the book on Amazon, but they also get signed copies if they go to your website.
Well, here's how it is. On Amazon.com, you can buy the regular book as is, or you can buy the signed copy on Amazon with the gifted bookmark that has the original Rolling Thunder tickets on it. And you can do the same on the book website, dylanandme.com. Thank you.
Louis Kemp, thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul.
Good
Enjoyed
luck
it.
with the book.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for watching Wall of Power TV. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. We're around next week, same time, same station. We'll see you soon.